Each year, on July 4th, on the tavern green of the Farmers Museum's historic village, a time-tested tradition plays out. Following the sounding of the church bell at precisely noon, the Declaration of Independence is read in its entirety. For the past 35 years, this foundational American document has been given in a stirring oration by local historian Tom Heitz, whose 36th consecutive performance can be seen in the Post from earlier today. This is then followed by the presentation of the militia, 13 toasts to the 13 colonies, and finally, Frederick Douglass's electrifying call to action, "What to the slave is the 4th of July?" This year will certainly be quite different. While we are incredibly grateful to be able to open our doors, in the interest of safety, we are unable to gather a large crowd to read these famous texts this year. So, in the spirit of this tradition, the Templeton Players have decided to open it up to our community instead. The program you're about to see, titled American Voices, is the result of this collaboration and features 13 members of our community and theater company sharing their favorite speeches and orations from across the wide swath of American history, from Abagail Adams in 1776 all the way to Sonia Sotomayor in 2001. And to begin, we are honored to present those immortal words of Frederick Douglass as performed by Reggie Brunson. We hope you enjoy the program.
Friends and fellow citizens, he who can address the audience without a quailing sensation has stronger nerves than I have. I do not remember ever to have appeared as a speaker with greater distrust of my ability than I do this day. The papers and placards say that I am to deliver a 4th of July oration. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, the distance between this platform and the slave plantation from which I escaped is considerable, and the difficulties overcome in getting from the latter to the former are by no means slight. That I'm here today is to me a matter of astonishment as well as of gratitude. This is the 4th of July. It is the birthday of your national freedom and of your political freedom, and I am glad, fellow citizens, that your nation is so young. There is hope in the thought, and hope is much needed under the dark clouds which lower above the horizon. 76 years ago, the people of this country were British subjects. The style and title of your sovereign people in which you now glory was not then born. You were under the British crown. Feeling themselves harshly and unjustly treated by the home government, your fathers, like men of honesty and men of spirit, earnestly sought redress. They saw themselves treated with sovereign indifference, coldness, and scorn. Yet they persevered. They succeeded. And today you reap the fruits of their success. The freedom gained is yours, and you therefore may properly celebrate this anniversary. Pride and patriotism, not less than gratitude, prompt you to celebrate and to hold it in perpetual remembrance. I have said that the Declaration of Independence is the ring bolt to the chain of your nation's destiny. So indeed I regard it. The principles contained in that instrument are saving principles. Stand by those principles. Be true to them on all occasions and all places, against all foes and at whatever cost. Fellow citizens, I'm not wanting in respect for the fathers of this republic. The signers of the Declaration of Independence were brave men. They were peace men, but they preferred revolution to peaceful submission to bondage. They showed forbearance, but that they knew its limits. They believed in order, but not in the order of tyranny. With them, nothing was settled that was not right. With them, justice, liberty, and humanity were final, not slavery and oppression. You may well cherish the memory of such men. They were great in their day and generation. Their solid manhood stands out the more as we contrast it with these degenerate times. Their statesmanship looked beyond the passing moment and stretched away in strength into the distant future. They seized upon eternal principles and set a glorious example in their defense. Mark them. Americans are remarkably familiar with all facts which make in their own favor. This is esteemed by some as a national trait, perhaps a national weakness. It is a fact that whatever makes for the wealth or for the reputation of Americans and can be had cheap will be found by Americans. Fellow citizens, pardon me. Allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I or those I represent to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? I say it with a sad sense of the disparity between us. I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought light and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice. I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminated temple of liberty and to call upon him to join you in joyous anthems were inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Fellow citizens, above your national tumultuous joy, I hear the mournful wail of millions whose chains, heavy and grievous yesterday, are today rendered more intolerable by the jubilee shouts that reach them. My subject then, my fellow citizens, is American slavery. I shall see this day and its popular characteristics from the slave's point of view. Would you have me argue that man is entitled to liberty? That he is the rightful owner of his own body? You have already declared it. Must I argue the wrongfulness of slavery? What am I to argue? That it is wrong to make men brutes, to rob them of their liberty, to work them without wages, to keep them ignorant of their relations to their fellow men, to beat them with sticks, to flay their flesh with lash, to load their limbs with irons, to hunt them with dogs, to sell them at auction, to sunder their families, to starve them into obedience and submission to their masters? Must I argue that a system that marked with blood and stained with pollution is wrong? No, I will not. I have better employment for my time and strength than such arguments would imply. At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument is needed. Oh, had I the ability and could reach the nation's ear, I would today pour out a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, with withering sarcasm and stern rebuke. For it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened. The conscience of the nation must be roused. The propriety of the nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed, and its crimes against man must be proclaimed and denounced. What to the American slave is the 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham. Your boasted liberty an unholy license. Your national greatness, swelling unity. Fellow citizens, this murderous traffic is today an active operation in this boasted republic. In the solitude of my spirit, I see clouds of dust raised on the highways of the South. I see the bleeding footsteps. I hear the doleful wail of fettered humanity on the way to the slave markets, where the victims are to be sold to the highest bidder. There I see the tender ties ruthlessly broken. Many a child has been snatched from the arms of its mother by bargains arranged in a state of brutal drunkenness to gratify the lust, caprice, and rapacity of the buyers and sellers of men. My soul sickens at the sight. The existence of slavery disturbs and endangers your union. It fetters your progress. It is the enemy of improvement, the deadly foe of education. It breeds insolence. It promotes vice. It shelters crime. It is a curse to the earth that supports it, and yet you cling to it. Allow me to say in closing, in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture I have this day presented, the state of this nation, I do not despair for this country. There are forces in operation which must inevitably work to the downfall of slavery. The doom of slavery is certain. I therefore leave off where I began, with hope and the fervent aspirations of William Lloyd Garrison. I say, and let every heart join in saying it, Godspeed the year of Jubilee, the wide world o'er, when from their galling chains set free the oppressed shall vilely bend the knee and wear the yoke of tyranny like brutes no more. That year will come, and freedom's reign to man his plundered rights again restore.
Hello, I'm Tessa, and I'm going to be reading in part of the Martin Luther King I Have a Dream speech. And I chose this speech because Martin Luther King's awesome. We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the city. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their adulthood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating, "For whites only." We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and the Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down on like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. And I am not unmindful that some of you have come here out of the great trials and tribulations. Some of you have come fresh from the narrow jail cells. Some of you have come from areas where your quest of freedom left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been veterans of creativity suffering. Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. Go back to Mississippi, go back to Alabama, go back to South Carolina, go back to Georgia, go back to Louisiana, go back to the slums and ghettos of the northern cities, knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. Let us not wallow in this valley of despair. I say to you today, my friends, even though we face difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day, on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state swelling with the heat of injustice, swelling with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of justice and freedom. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but of the contact of their character. I have a dream. I have a dream that one day in Alabama, with its vicious racists and its governor having its lips dripping with the word interposition and nullification, one day right here in Alabama, little black boys and little black girls will be able to join hands with the white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope, this is our faith, that I go back to the South with. This faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be able to be free one day. This will be the day when all the sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing, land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride, and every mountainside let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. So let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let it ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let it ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let it ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let it ring from the stone mountains of Georgia. Let it ring from the Lookout Mountain, Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. When we allow it to freedom to ring, when we let it ring from every city and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last, great God Almighty, we are free at last.
Hello, I am Lucretia Mott. This is my Discourse on Woman, 1850. The question is often asked, what does woman want more than she enjoys? What is she seeking to obtain? Of what rights is she deprived? What privileges are withheld from her? I answer she asks nothing as favor but as right. She wants to be acknowledged a moral, responsible being. She is seeking not to be governed by laws in the making of which she has no voice. She is deprived of almost every right in civil society and is a cipher in the nation, except in the right of presenting a petition. Her exclusion from the pulpit and ministry, her duties marked out for her by her equal brother man, subject to creeds and rules and disciplines made for her by him. This is unworthy her true dignity. In how many cases in our society the husband and wife begin life together and by equal industry and united effort accumulate to themselves a comfortable home. In the event of the death of the wife, the household remains undisturbed. His farm or his workshop is not broken up or in any way molested. But when the husband dies, he either gives his wife a portion of their joint accumulation or the law apportions to her a share. The homestead is broken up and she's dispossessed of that which she earned equally with him. For what she lacked in physical strength, she made up in constancy of labor and toil, day and evening. The sons, then, coming into possession of the property, speak of having to keep their mother, when she, in reality, is aiding to keep them. Where is the justice in this state of things? Now, far be it from me to encourage women to vote, or take an active part in politics in the present state of our government. Her right to the elective franchise, however, is the same and should be yielded to her, whether she exercise that right or not. Oh, would that man, too, would have no participation in a government based upon the life-taking principle, upon retaliation and the sword? Well, it is unworthy a Christian nation. But when in the diffusion of light and intelligence a convention shall be called to make regulations for self-government on Christian, non-resistant principles, now I can see no good reason why woman should not participate in such an assemblage, taking part equally with man. Let woman then go on, not asking his favour, but claiming as right the removal of all hindrances to her elevation. Let her receive encouragement for the proper cultivation of all her powers, so that she may enter profitably into the active business of life, employing her own hands in ministering to her necessities, strengthening her physical being by proper exercise and observance of the laws of health. Let her not be ambitious to display a fair hand and to promenade the fashionable streets of our cities, but rather coveting earnestly the best gifts. Let her strive to occupy such walks in society as will befit her true dignity in all the relations of life. No fear that she will then transcend the proper limits of female delicacy. True modesty will be as fully preserved in acting out those important vocations to which she may be called as in the nursery or at the fireside, ministering to man's self-indulgence. Then, in the marriage union, the independence of the husband and wife will be equal, their dependence mutual, and their obligations reciprocal. I would charge you to water the undying bud and give it a healthy culture and open its beauty to the sun. And then you may hope that when your life is bound with another, you will go on equally and in a fellowship that shall pervade every earthly interest. Thank you.
On the Pulse of Morning is a poem written by Maya Angelou for the inauguration of President Bill Clinton in 1993. Admittedly, Angelou was sure that she would have trouble holding in her emotion for this poem that deals with the themes of unity, faith, and determination. I saw Maya Angelou speak once while in college. Her presence was strong, and I was filled with emotion and wept while she spoke. I felt as though she were talking to me. On the Pulse of Morning. A rock, a river, a tree, host to species long departed, marked the mastodon, the dinosaur, who left tokens of their sojourn here on our planet floor. Any broad alarm of their hastening doom is lost in the gloom of dust and ages. But today the rock cries out to us clearly, forcefully. Come, you may stand upon my back and face your distant destiny, but seek no haven in my shadow. I will give you no hiding place down here. You created only a little lower than the angels, have crouched too long in the bruising darkness, have lain too long face down in ignorance. Your mouths spilling words armed with slaughter. The rock cries out to us today. You may stand upon me, but do not hide your face. Across the wall of the world, a river sings a beautiful song. Come, rest here by my side, each of you, a bordered country, delicate and strangely made proud, yet thrusting perpetually under siege. Your armed struggles for profit have left collars of waste upon my shore, currents of debris upon my breast. Yet today I call you to my riverside, if you will study war no more. Come, clad in peace, and I will sing the songs the Creator gave to me when I and the tree and the rock were one. Before cynicism was a bloody sear across your brow, and when yet you knew, you still knew nothing. The river sang and sings on. There is a true yearning to respond to the singing river and the wise rock. So say the Asian, the Hispanic, the Jew, the African, the Native American, the Sioux, the Catholic, the Muslim, the French, the Greek, the Irish, the rabbi, the priest, the sheik, the gay, the straight, the preacher, the privileged, the homeless, the teacher. They hear. They all hear the speaking of the tree. Today, the first and the last of every tree speaks to humankind. Come to me, here beside the river. Plant yourself beside me, here beside the river. Each of you, descendant of some passed-on traveler, has been paid for. You, who gave me my first name, you, Pawnee, Apache, Seneca, you, Cherokee Nation, who rested with me, then forced on bloody feet, left me to the employment of other seekers, desperate for gain, starving for gold. You, the Turk, the Swede, the German, the Eskimo, the Scot. You, the Ashanti, the Yoruba, the Crew, bought, sold, stolen, arriving on a nightmare, praying for a dream. Here, root yourselves beside me. I am that tree planted by the river, which will not be moved. I, the rock, the river, I, the tree, am yours. Your passages have been paid. Lift up your faces. You have a piercing need for this bright morning dawning for you. History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. Lift up your eyes upon the day breaking for you. Give birth again to the dream. Women, children, men, take it into the palms of your hands. Mold it into the shape of your most private need. Sculpt it into the image of your most public self. Lift up your hearts. Each new hour holds new chances for new beginnings. Do not be wedded forever to fear, yoked eternally to brutishness. The horizon leans forward, offering you space to place new steps of change. Here, on the pulse of this fine day, you may have the courage to look up and out upon me, the rock, the river, the tree, your country. No less to Midas than to the mendicant, no less to you now than the mastodon then. Here, on the pulse of this new day, you may have the grace to look up and out and into your sister's eyes, into your brother's face, your country, and say simply, very simply with hope, good morning.
The following remarks are excerpts from Franklin Delano Roosevelt's first presidential inaugural address. That address was delivered to Congress on March 4th, 1933. America was in the depths of the Great Depression, as depicted in these images. This is preeminently the time to speak the truth, the whole truth, frankly and boldly. We need not shrink from honesty facing conditions in our country today. This great nation will endure, as it has endured, will revive, and will prosper. We face our common difficulties. Taxes have risen. Our ability to pay has fallen. Farmers find no markets for their produce, and the savings of many years and thousands of families are gone. More important, a host of unemployed citizens face the grim problem of existence, and an equally great number toil with little return. Only a foolish optimist can deny the dark realities of the moment. Our financial leaders have failed through their own stubbornness and their own incompetence, and have abdicated responsibility. They have no vision, and when there is no vision, the people perish. Happiness lies not in the mere possession of money. It lies in the joy of achievement, in the thrill of the creative effort. That joy, the moral stimulation of work, no longer must be forgotten in the mad chase of evanescent profits. These dark days, my friends, will be worth all they cost us if they teach us that our true destiny is but to minister to our fellow citizens. We must act. We must act quickly. In our progress towards a resumption of work, we require safeguards against a return of the evils of the old order. There must be strict supervision of all banking and credits and investments. The basic thought that guides these specific means of national recovery is a recognition of the old and permanently important manifestation of the American spirit of the pioneer. It is the way to recovery. It is the immediate way. It is the strongest assurance that recovery will endure. In the field of foreign policy, I would dedicate this nation to the policy of the good neighbor, the neighbor who resolutely respects himself, and because he does so, respects the rights of others, the neighbor who respects his obligations and respects the sanctity of his agreements in and with a world of neighbors. If I read the temper of our people correctly, we now realize, as we have never realized before, our interdependence on each other. That we cannot merely take, but we must give as well. We are, I know, ready and willing to submit our lives and our property because it makes possible a leadership which aims at the larger good. This I propose to offer, pledging that the larger purposes will bind upon us all as a sacred obligation with the unity of duty. With this pledge taken, I assume unhesitatingly the leadership of this great army of our people dedicated to a disciplined attack upon our common problems. I am prepared under my constitutional duty to recommend the measures that a stricken nation in the midst of a stricken world may require. These measures, or other such measures as the Congress may build out of its experience and wisdom, I shall seek within my constitutional authority to bring to speedy adoption. For the trust reposed in me, I will return the courage and the devotion that befit the time. I can do no less. We face the arduous days that lie before us in the warm courage of national unity, with the clear consciousness of seeking old and precious moral values, with the clean satisfaction that comes from the stern performance of duty by young and old alike. The people of the United States have not failed. In their need, they have registered a mandate that they want direct, vigorous action. They have asked for discipline and direction under the leadership. They have made me the present instrument of their wishes. In the spirit of that gift, I take it. In this dedication of a nation, we humbly ask the blessing of our Creator. May He protect and guide every one of us, and may He guide me in the days to come. Thank you.
I would like to share with you Elizabeth Cady Stanton's declaration of sentiments, which she delivered at the Seneca Falls Convention in Seneca, New York, in July of 1848. When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one portion of the family of man to assume among the people of the earth a position different from that which they have hitherto occupied, but one to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes that impel them to such a course. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of those who suffer from it to refuse allegiance to it, and to insist upon the institution of a new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to effect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they were accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of the women under this government, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to demand the equal station to which they are entitled. The history of mankind is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations on the part of man toward woman, having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over her. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has never permitted her to exercise her inalienable right to the elective franchise. He has compelled her to submit to laws in the formation of which she had no voice. He has withheld from her rights which are given to the most ignorant and degraded men, both natives and foreigners. Having deprived her of this first right of a citizen, the elective franchise, thereby leaving her without representation in the halls of legislation, he has oppressed her on all sides. He has made her, if married in the eye of the law, civilly dead. He has taken from her all right in property, even to the wages she earns. He has made her morally an irresponsible being, as she can commit many crimes with impunity, provided they be done in the presence of her husband. In the covenant of marriage, she is compelled to promise obedience to her husband, he becoming, to all intents and purposes, her master, the law giving him power to deprive her of her liberty and to administer chastisement. He has so framed the laws of divorce as to what shall be the proper causes, and, in case of separation, to whom the guardianship of the children shall be given, as to be wholly regardless of the happiness of women, the law in all cases going upon a false supposition of the supremacy of man, and giving all power into his hands. After depriving her of all rights as a married woman, if single and the owner of property, he has taxed her to support a government which recognizes her only when her property can be made profitable to it. He has monopolized nearly all the profitable employments, and from those she is permitted to follow she receives but a scanty remuneration. He closes against her all the avenues to wealth and distinction which he considers most honorable to himself. As a teacher of theology, medicine, or law, she is not known. He has denied her the facilities for obtaining a thorough education, all colleges being closed against her. He allows her in church as well as state, but a subordinate position, claiming apostolic authority for her exclusion from the ministry, and with some exceptions, from any public participation in the affairs of the church. He has created a false public sentiment by giving to the world a different code of morals for men and for women, by which moral delinquencies which exclude women from society are not only tolerated, but deemed of little account in man. He has usurped the prerogative of Jehovah himself, claiming it as his right to assign for her a sphere of action, when that belongs to her conscience and to her God. He has endeavored in every way that he could to destroy her confidence in her own powers, to lessen her self-respect, and to make her willing to lead a dependent and abject life. Now, in view of this entire disfranchisement of one half of the people of this country, their social and religious degradation, in view of the unjust laws above mentioned, and because women do feel themselves aggrieved, oppressed, and fraudulently deprived of their most sacred rights, we insist that they have immediate admission to all the rights and privileges which belong to them as citizens of the United States. In entering upon the great work before us, we anticipate no small amount of misconception, misrepresentation, and ridicule. But we shall use every instrumentality within our power to effect our object. We shall employ agents, circulate tracts, petition the state and national legislatures, and endeavor to enlist the pulpit and the press in our behalf. We hope this convention will be followed by a series of conventions embracing every part of the country.
The spacecraft was a long way from home. I thought it might be a good idea, just after Saturn, to have them take one last glance homeward. From Saturn, I knew the Earth would appear too small for Voyager to make out any detail. Our planet would be just a point of light, a lonely pixel hardly distinguishable from the many other points of light Voyager could see, nearby planets and far-off suns. But precisely because of the obscurity of our world thus revealed, such a picture might be worth having. So here they are, a mosaic of squares laid down on top of the planets and a background smattering of more distant stars. Because of the reflection of sunlight off the spacecraft, the Earth seems to be sitting in a beam of light, as if there were some special significance to this small world. But it's just an accident of geometry and optics. And yet, there is no sign of humans in this picture. Not our reworking of the Earth's surface, not our machines, not ourselves. We are too small. On the scale of worlds, humans are inconsequential, a thin film of life on an obscure and solitary lump of rock and metal. Look again at that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on a mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam. The earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors so that, in glory and triumph, they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another, and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known.
Abagail Adams, the wife of our second president, and her husband John Adams, wrote over 1,000 letters to each other over the course of their marriage. There was such a vast number of letters shared, in part because they spent so many years during their marriage apart from one another. In 1776, while John and other colonial leaders were meeting in Philadelphia in the Second Continental Congress to frame the government for the new United States, Abigail wrote a letter to her husband in which she urges him to remember the ladies. Abigail was in Braintree, Massachusetts, managing the family farm and raising their 4 children while her husband was fighting for American independence. In her Remember the Ladies letter, along with personal subjects in conversation with her husband, she argued that women should be recognized as something more than property and that they should be protected from arbitrary and unrestrained power men held over them in the new laws being written. This letter is from Abagail Adams to John Adams, 31st March, 1776. I wish you ever would write to me a letter half as long as I write you, and tell me, if you may, where your fleet are gone, what sort of defense Virginia can make against our common enemy, whether it is so situated as to make an able defense. Are not the gentry lords and the common people vassals? Are they not like the uncivilized natives Britain represents to us to be? I hope the riflemen who have shown themselves very savage and even bloodthirsty are not a specimen of the general of the people. I am willing to allow the colony great merit for having produced a Washington, but they have been shamefully duped by a Dunmore. I've sometimes been ready to think that the passion for liberty cannot be equally strong in the breast of those who have been accustomed to deprive their fellow creatures of theirs. Of this I am certain, that it is not founded upon that generous and Christian principle of doing to others as we would have others do unto us. Do you not want to see Boston? I am fearful of the smallpox, or I should have been in there before this time. I got Mr. Crane to go to our house and see what state it is in. I find it has been occupied by one of the doctors of a regiment, very dirty, but no other damage has been done to it. The few things which are left in it are gone. Cranch has the key which he never delivered up. I have wrote to him for it, and am determined to get it cleaned as soon as possible and shut it up. I look upon a new acquisition of property, a property which 1 month ago I did not value a single shilling, and could with pleasure have seen it in flames. The town in general is left in a better state than we expected, more owing to a precipitate flight than any regard to the inhabitants, though some individuals discovered a sense of honor and justice and have left the rent of the houses in which they were for the owners and the furniture unhurt, or, if damaged, sufficient to make it good. Others have committed abominable ravages. The mansion house of your president is safe and the furniture unhurt, while both the house and furniture of the Solicitor General have fallen a prey to their own merciless party. Surely the very fiends feel reverential awe for the virtue and patriotism, while they detest the parricide and traitor. I feel very differently at the approach of spring to what I did a month ago. We knew not when we could plant or sow with safety, whether when we had toiled we could reap the fruits of our own industry, whether we could rest in our own cottages, or whether we should not be driven from the seacoast to seek shelter in the wilderness. But now we feel as if we might sit under our own vine and eat the good of the land. I feel a gaiety du corps to which I was before a stranger. I think the sun looks brighter, the birds sing more melodiously, and nature puts on a more cheerful countenance. We feel a temporary peace, and the poor fugitives are returning to the deserted inhabitants. Though we felicitate ourselves, we sympathize with those who are trembling, lest the lot of Boston should be theirs. But they cannot be in similar circumstances unless pusillanimity and cowardice should take possession of them. They have time and warning given them to see the evil and shun it. I long to hear that you have declared an independency. And by the way, in the new code of laws, which I suppose will be necessary for you to make, I desire that you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to form a rebellion, and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation. That your sex are naturally tyrannical is a truth, so thoroughly established as to admit of no dispute. But such of you as wish to be happy willingly, give up the harsh title of master for the more tender and endearing one of friend. Why then, not put it out of the power of the vicious and the lawless to use us with cruelty and indignity with impunity? Men of sense in all ages abhor those customs which treat us only as the vassals of your sex. Regard us then as beings placed by Providence under your protection, and in imitation to the Supreme Being, making the use of that power only for our happiness. Abigail Adams' letter to her husband was basically the first argument for women's rights. Abigail went on to be not only the wife of a president of the United States, but also the mother of the 6th president of the United States when her son became our American president. Barbara Bush is the only other First Lady to have had the privilege of having both a husband and son serve in the White House. Thank you.
Margaret Madeline Chase Smith was an American politician. A member of the Republican Party, she was the first woman to serve in both houses of the United States Congress, and the first woman to represent Maine in either. A moderate Republican, she was among the first to criticize the tactics of McCarthyism, an anti-communist witch hunt, in her 1950 speech, Declaration of Conscience. This is an abridged version of her speech to the Senate.
Declaration of Conscience. Mr. President, I would like to speak briefly and simply about a serious national condition. It is a national feeling of fear and frustration that could result in national suicide and the end of everything that we Americans hold dear. It is a condition that comes from the lack of effective leadership in either the legislative branch and the executive branch of our government. I speak as briefly as possible because too much harm has already been done with irresponsible words of bitterness and selfish political opportunism. I speak simply and briefly in the hope that my words will be taken to heart. I speak as a Republican. I speak as a woman. I speak as a United States Senator. I speak as an American. I think that it is high time for the United States Senate and its members to do some soul searching for us to weigh our consciences on the manner in which we are performing our duty to the people of America. I think that it is high time that we remembered that we have sworn to uphold and defend the Constitution. I think that it is high time that we remembered that the Constitution, as amended, speaks not only for the freedom of speech, but also of trial by jury instead of trial by accusation. Those of us who shout the loudest about Americanism in making character assassinations are all too frequently those who, by our own words and acts, ignore some of the basic principles of Americanism. The right to criticize, the right to hold unpopular beliefs, the right to protest, the right of independent thought. Today, our country is being psychologically divided by the confusions and the suspicions that are bred in the United States Senate to spread like cancerous tentacles of know nothing, suspect everything attitudes. The American people are tired and sick of seeing innocent people smeared and guilty people whitewashed. The nation sorely needs a Republican victory, but I don't want to see the Republican Party ride to political victory on the 4 horsemen of calumny: fear, ignorance, bigotry, and smear. As a woman, I wonder how the mothers, wives, sisters, and daughters feel about the way in which the members of their families have been politically mangled in Senate debate. And I use the word debate advisedly. As a United States Senator, I am not proud of the way the Senate has been made a rendezvous for vilification, for selfish political gain at the sacrifice of individual reputations and national unity. As an American, I am shocked at the way Republicans and Democrats alike are playing directly into the communist design of confuse, divide, and conquer. As an American, I don't want a Democratic administration whitewash or cover up any more than I want a Republican smear or witch hunt. As an American, I want to see our nation recapture the strength and unity it once had when we fought the enemy instead of ourselves. It is with these thoughts I have drafted what I call a declaration of conscience.
Declaration of Conscience. 1. We are Republicans, but we are Americans first. It is as Americans that we express our concern with the growing confusion that threatens the security and stability of our country. Democrats and Republicans alike have contributed to that confusion. 2. The Democratic administration has initially created the confusion by its lack of effective leadership, by its contradictory grave warnings and optimistic assurances, by its complacency to the threat of communism here at home, by its oversensitiveness to rightful criticism, by its petty bitterness against its critics. 3. Certain elements of the Republican Party have materially added to this confusion in the hopes of riding the Republican Party to victory through the selfish political exploitation of fear, bigotry, ignorance, and intolerance. There are enough mistakes of the Democrats for Republicans to criticize constructively without resorting to political smears. 4. To this extent, Democrats and Republicans alike have unwittingly but undeniably played directly into the communist design of confuse, divide, and conquer. 5. It is high time that we stopped thinking politically as Republicans and Democrats about elections and started thinking patriotically as Americans about national security based on individual freedom. It is high time that we all stopped being tools and victims of totalitarian techniques that, if continued here unchecked, will surely end what we have come to cherish as the American way of life.
Hello, this speech is from Sonia Sotomayor, Supreme Court nominee, from her speech at Berkeley Law in 2001. Who am I? I am a New Yorkian. For those of you on the West Coast who do not know what that term means, I am a born and bred New Yorker of Puerto Rican-born parents who came to the States during World War II. Like many other immigrants to this great land, my parents came because of poverty and to attempt to find and secure a better life for themselves and the family that they hoped to have. They largely succeed. For that, my brother and I are very grateful. The story of that success is what makes me and what makes me the Latina that I am. The Latina side of my identity was forged and closely nurtured by my family through our shared experience and traditions. In this time of great debate, we must remember that it is not political struggles that create a Latino or Latina identity. I became a Latina by the way I love and the way I live my life. My family showed me by their example how wonderful and vibrant life is and how wonderful and magical it is to have a Latina soul. They taught me to love being Puerto Rican and to love America and value its lessons that great things could be achieved if one works hard for it. But achieving success here is no easy accomplishment for Latinos and Latinas. And although that struggle did not and does not create Latina identity, it does inspire how I live my life.
It was a dedication of the cemetery that had been constructed for the dead at Gettysburg. And it was laid out like a classic Greek cemetery because we were in the middle of the Greek revival in the United States. The keynote speaker was the famous orator, Edward Everett, who spoke for 2 hours. And when he finished, Lincoln was asked to say a few words to dedicate the cemetery. Lincoln began the speech on White House stationery a couple of days before he left for Gettysburg. He finished on the train in his room that night. He was also ill, which may have been the beginnings of a case of smallpox. And they are now probably, in some ways, the most famous speech in American history. For a better understanding of Lincoln's influence on American history with this speech, I recommend reading the book Lincoln at Gettysburg by Gary Wills, which was published in 1992, and for which Wills won the Pulitzer Prize in Nonfiction in 1993. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we're engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do so. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great work, the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth.
Hi, my name is Danielle Henrici, and I will be reading a speech given by Matilda Jocelyn Gage at the National Women's Rights Convention in 1852. This convention has assembled to discuss the subject of women's rights and form some settled plan of action for the future. While so much is said of the inferior intellect of woman, it is, by a strange absurdity, conceded that very many eminent men owe their station in life to their mothers. To those who say women do not desire their rights or think they have them already, I would say, converse with any intelligent woman on the subject, and you will not find them indifferent. Woman feels deeply, keenly, her degradation, but is bound by the iron hand of custom which so long has exercised tyrant rule over her. An ignorant woman is virtually in the same condition as the peasant who thinks it right that a king shall rule over him. And to keep him content, he is made to believe it would be blasphemy and treason in him to call in question this right. The question is, how can this mental and moral lethargy which now binds the generality of women be shaken off? They are educated to a state of entire dependence, taught before marriage to expect a support from their fathers and after from their husbands, to suppress their convictions if contrary to those of their fathers, brothers, and husbands, and to allow others to act for them. This state of listlessness follows as a natural consequence. Being placed in a position compelling them to act has caused many persons to discover talents in themselves they were before unaware of possessing. Great emergencies produce great leaders, seemingly fitted by Providence, while it is but the arousing of some energy hitherto dormant. Those who fear woman's incapacity to cope with the trials of life should consider what is now actually thrust upon her by existing customs. Thousands of women are driven to a life of pollution by the insufficiency of wages in those departments of labor which she is legitimately permitted to enter. Although our country makes great professions in regard to general liberty, yet the right to particular liberty, natural equality, and personal independence of two great portions of this country is treated from custom with the greatest contempt. And color in the one instance, and sex in the other, are brought as reasons why they should be so derided. And the mere mention of such natural rights is frowned upon as tending to promote sedition and anarchy. Let us look at the rights it is boasted women now possess. After marriage, the husband and wife are considered as one person in law, which I hold to be false. Were it so, the act of one would be as binding as the acts of the other, and wise legislators would not meet to enact statutes defining the peculiar rights of each. Were it so, a woman could not legally be a man's inferior. Every father has a right to bind or give away any of his children while minors without the consent or even knowledge of the mother. And when he dies, she is not considered a competent guardian for the child, and the father can, in his will or deed, exclude the mother from participation in such guardianship. The father alone has legal power over the children. A mother, as such, is entitled to no power over her own children. A woman's personal property by marriage becomes absolutely her husband's, which at his death he may give away from her. The law very kindly allows a woman her wearing apparel, as well as jewels and ornaments, provided the latter were not disposed of by her husband previous to his death. And, provided the children do not live with her, she is allowed one bed, bedstead, and bedding. To mothers we look. especially to young mothers, for the instruction of their children in the principles of justice and right, and to see that equal justice is granted to both, not giving one every advantage and according none to the other. Self-reliance is one of the first lessons to be taught our daughters. They should be educated with our sons and equally with them taught to look forward to some independent means of support. We need not expect the concessions demanded by women will be peaceably granted. There will be a long moral warfare before the citadel yields. In the meantime, let us take possession of the outposts. The public must be aroused to a full sense of the justice of our claims. Beside the duty of educating our children so as to make the path of right easy to their feet is that of discussion, newspaper articles, petitions. All great reforms are gradual. Fear not any attempt to frown down the revolution already commenced. Nothing is a more fertile aid of reform than an attempt to check it. Work on.
While the nation is buoyant with patriotism and all hearts are attuned to praise, it is with sorrow we come to strike this one discordant note on this 100th anniversary of our country's birth. Our faith is firm and unwavering in the broad principles of human rights proclaimed in 1776, not only as abstract truths, but as the cornerstones of a republic. Yet we cannot forget, even in this glad hour, that while all men of every race and clime and condition have been invested with the full rights of citizenship under our hospitable flag, all women still suffer the degradation of disfranchisement. The history of our country, the past 100 years, has been a series of assumptions and usurpations of power over women in direct opposition to the principles of just government acknowledged by the United States as its foundations, which are, first, the natural rights of each individual, second, the equality of these rights, third, that rights not delegated are retained by the individual, fourth, that no person can exercise the rights of others without delegated authority, fifth, that the non-use of rights does not destroy them. And for the violation of these fundamental principles of our government, we arraign our rulers on this 4th of July, 1876. And these are our articles of impeachment. Bills of attainder have been passed by the introduction of the word male into all the state constitutions, denying to women the right of suffrage, and thereby making sex a crime, an exercise of power clearly forbidden in Article 1, Sections 9, 10 of the United States Constitution. The writ of habeas corpus, the only protection against unjust imprisonment, is held inoperative in every state of the Union in case of a married woman against her husband. The marital rights of the husband being in all cases primary, and the rights of the wife secondary. The right of trial by a jury of one's peers was so guarded that states refused to ratify the original Constitution until it was guaranteed by the Sixth Amendment. And yet, the women of this nation have never been allowed a jury of their peers, being tried in all cases by man, native and foreign, educated and ignorant, virtuous and vicious. Young girls have been arraigned in our courts for the crime of infanticide, tried, convicted, hanged, victims perchance of judge, jurors, advocates, while no woman's voice could be heard in their defense. And not only are women denied a jury of their peers, but in some cases, jury trial altogether. Taxation without representation. The immediate cause of the rebellion of the colonies against Great Britain is one of the grievous wrongs the women of this country have suffered. And moreover, we are taxed to support the very legislators and judges who make laws and render decisions adverse to women. And for refusing to pay such unjust taxation, the houses, lands, bonds, and stocks of women have been seized and sold within the present year, thus proving Lord Coke's assertion that the very act of taxing a man's property without his consent is, in effect, disfranchising him of every civil right. Unequal codes for men and women. Held by law, a perpetual minor, deemed incapable of self-protection, even in the industries of the world, woman is denied equality of rights. The fact of sex, not the quantity or quality of work in most cases, decides the pay of the position. And because of this injustice, thousands of fatherless girls are compelled to choose between a life of shame and starvation. Laws catering to man's vices have created two codes of morals in which penalties are graded according to the political status of the offender. Under such laws, women are fined and imprisoned if found alone in the streets or in public places of resort at certain hours. Under the pretense of regulating public morals, police officers seizing the occupants of disreputable houses march the women in platoons to prison, while the men, partners in their guilt, go free. Special legislation for women has placed us in a most anomalous position. Women invested with the rights of citizens in one section, voters, jurors, office holders, crossing an imaginary line, are subjects in the next. In some states, a married woman may hold property and transact business in her own name. In others, her earnings belong to her husband. In some states, a woman may testify against her husband, sue and be sued in the courts. In others, she has no redress in case of damaged person, property, or character. In case of divorce, on account of adultery in the husband, the innocent wife is held to possess no right to children or property unless by special decree of the court. But in no state of the Union has the wife the right to her own person or to any part of the joint earnings of the co-partnership during the life of the husband. In some states, women may enter the law schools and practice in courts, In others, they are forbidden. In some universities, girls enjoy equal educational advantages with boys, while many of the proudest institutions in the land deny them admittance. Though the sons of China, Japan, and Africa are welcome there, but the privileges already granted in the several states are by no means secure. Laws passed after years of untiring effort, guaranteeing married women certain rights of property and mothers the custody of their children, have been repealed in states where we supposed all was safe. Thus have our most sacred rights been made the football of legislative caprice, proving that a power which grants as a privilege what by nature is a right may withhold the same as a penalty when deeming it necessary for its own perpetuation. Representation of woman has had no place in the nation's thought. Since the incorporation of the 13 original states, 24 have been admitted to the Union, not one of which has recognized woman's right of self-government. On this birthday of our national liberties, July 4th, 1876, Colorado, like all her elder sisters, comes into the Union with the invidious word male in her Constitution. Universal manhood suffrage, by establishing an aristocracy of sex, imposes upon the women of this nation a more absolute and cruel despotism than monarchy. In that, woman finds a political master in her father, husband, brother, son. The aristocracies of the old world are based upon birth, wealth, refinement, education, nobility, brave deeds of chivalry. In this nation, on sex alone, exalting brute force above moral power, vice above virtue, ignorance above education, and the son above the mother who bore him. The judiciary above the nation has proved itself but the echo of the party in power, by upholding and enforcing laws that are opposed to the spirit and letter of the Constitution. When the slave power was dominant, the Supreme Court decided that a black man was not a citizen because he had not the right to vote. And when the Constitution was so amended as to make all persons citizens, the same High Tribunal decided that a woman, though a citizen, had not the right to vote. Such vacillating interpretations of constitutional law unsettle our faith in judicial authority and undermine the liberties of the whole people. These articles of impeachment against our rulers we now submit to the impartial judgment of the people. To all these wrongs and oppressions, woman has not submitted in silence and resignation. From the beginning of the century, when Abagail Adams, the wife of one president and the mother of another, said, "We will not hold ourselves bound to obey laws in which we have no voice of representation." If these rights are ignored in the case of one half the people, the nation is surely preparing for its downfall. And now, at the close of 100 years, as the hour hand of the great clock that marks the centuries points to 1876, we declare our faith in the principles of self-government, our full equality with man in natural rights, that woman was made first for her own happiness, with the absolute right to herself, to all the opportunities and advantages life affords for her complete development. And we deny that dogma of the centuries, incorporated in the codes of all nations, that woman was made for man, her best interests in all cases to be sacrificed to his will. We ask our rulers at this hour no special favors, no special privileges, no special legislation. We ask justice. We ask equality. We ask that all the civil and political rights that belong to citizens of the United States be guaranteed to us and our daughters forever.